Hear the word of the Lord. In Matthew 18:18-20, Jesus gives us an awesome and a reassuring promise. It is the promise of his presence and his power. Listen to these words. Assuredly, I say to you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again, I say to you that if two of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where two or three are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. May God add his blessing to this reading of his word and fill it with his Spirit so that we can understand the fullness of its meaning. Let us pray. Blessed living Father, Lord of us all, we are your children. We long to know what it means to be your sons and daughters, inseparably related to you by grace, and open and receptive to each other in deep, caring fellowship. Lord, you want to make your children a family, and we are willing. We long for the closeness of shared faith, mutual concerns, daring hopes. Bless us, Lord. Make us one, even as you are one. We love you, Father, and want to experience your love more deeply than ever before. And then we long to be able to reach out to others and be to them all that you've been to us. Make it so, Father. Make it so. In Jesus' holy name, amen. When I say the word lonely, what comes to your mind? A derelict on a park bench? Some one of the street people who wander about in the asphalt jungle of any one of our great cities? Someone who doesn't have many friends? Someone who lives alone? Careful. Loneliness is not limited to those solitary people. Loneliness is known by all of us. There is a kind of loneliness that we know when problems pile up and we feel that we're going through something no one else has ever endured. Do you know what I mean? Loneliness, rather than being the condition of a few solitary people, is the universal condition inside of most everyone. It's not isolation, it's insulation. It's insulating ourselves from deep, caring relationships with other people. One of the greatest discoveries that I've ever made is that loneliness has nothing to do with the absence of people. You can be lonely in a marriage, lonely with a great crowd of people around you, lonely among your friends, even lonely in a church. I talk to people every day who are suffering this hidden hurt of loneliness. So often we describe it in other words and try to explain it away in other ways, but it's there, deep down inside of everyone. Do you feel it? The loneliness of unrelatedness? I received a phone call from a good friend of mine in New York. I've known him through the years. He's climbed up through the chairs of the company, and now he's on the top of the heap. When I heard his voice on the phone, I knew that something was wrong. He said, "Lloyd, I'm on top, but I feel lonely." He said, "I can't talk to anyone up here in the rarefied atmosphere of the executive's office. I've got to have it all together. I can't admit my mistakes or my failures. And the worst thing of all, no one ever calls me anymore. except when they want me to do something or give some money to some cause. No one cares about me anymore. I talked to one of Hollywood's greatest singers. He said, "Lloyd, when I entertain, the crowds cheer. And then after my last song, I slip away backstage into my limousine, and I'm whisked off to my home in Beverly Hills. And then I walk into the front door of my house, and I expect the same kind of cheers from my wife and my children. But they don't seem to know that they're living with a star." He said, "Oh, if I only had some deep relationships. How do you overcome loneliness?" I talked to a teenager. He said, "Oh, if my folks would only let me talk until I know what I want to say. I wish someone understood me. And even though I'm going on to one of the best colleges in the country, and I've got a great sports car and lots of people I think are my friends, I'm not sure anybody really knows me. I wish that I really could get over this empty feeling inside." A wife said about her husband, "Oh, if he'd only just ask me how I'm feeling. I don't know why I always have to hit him over the head with some big problem to get his attention. I wish he really cared about what was going on inside of me." When I confronted him with that, she said, he told me he was just as lonely inside as I felt. How can we overcome that and begin to communicate loneliness? One day after church, a woman came out of church and she said, "Lloyd, I'm old enough to be your mother, and I've got a request. Would you do one thing for me?" And I looked at her face and I said, "Why, of course." She said, "Would you give me a hug?" Why, I said, "Of course." And I hugged her. And then with tears streaming down her face, she said, "Do you know the loneliest hour of the week for me? It's after I leave church. You know, after your message and the singing of the hymns and the fun of being in the congregation, I suddenly feel a terrible loneliness hit me as I'm on my way home. And then I go into my apartment, I open a can of soup and pour it in a pan and heat it up, and as I'm waiting, the loneliness just creeps all over my body and my mind. And then I sit down all by myself and eat my soup all alone." Loneliness. And then that terrible kind of loneliness that hits all of us when difficulties get bigger and bigger, and we try and reach out of the inner chamber of our loneliness to find someone else who understands. And often we find that everyone else is so busy with his or her problem that it's difficult for them to reach out and say, "I know, I understand." Loneliness. Billy Graham was asked once, "What is the greatest problem in America?" And he responded by saying, "One word, and one word alone, crystallizes the deepest need in America: loneliness." And Paul Tournier, the great Swiss psychologist, said, "Loneliness is the quiet desperation inside of most every human being." What can we do about it? In this series of messages on If God Cares, Why Do I Still Have Problems, we've asserted that for every one of our problems, there's a promise of the Lord in the Scriptures. Never more so than for the problem of loneliness. But I'm sure many of you have thought of many different promises you think is the answer to the problem of loneliness. You've probably thought, "Oh, I know the one. Jesus said, 'Lo, I will be with you always,' or 'I will never leave you nor forsake you.' I want to take another promise that's even more profound and penetrating and far-reaching than that. It's the promise that we read from Matthew 18, verses 18 to 20. Jesus said, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven. Whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Where two agree on earth, it will be done by the Father in heaven. And wherever two or three are gathered together in my name, said Jesus, I will be there in the midst of them. Now, Jesus often talked in triplets. And the only way to understand all three dimensions is to take the third and then work backward. And that's what I'd like to do right now as we attack the problem of loneliness together. Jesus suggests that we can only know half of his power alone. That the fullness of his power is available when we come together with a caring friend or a cluster of friends and meet him together. So let's consider what it means. Where two or three are gathered in my name, I will be in the midst of them. Jesus Christ came to reconcile us to the Father, to be God's only begotten Son in our midst, so we might know what it means to be a son and a daughter of God, our Father. And what Jesus does is take our hand and link it inseparably with the hand of the Father. But he does something else. He links our hands with each other. So it's in the fellowship that we discover the fullness of Christ's power. He promises to come wherever two or more gather in his name. G. Campbell Morgan suggests that the force of that is that wherever two or more gather into his name, that is, into his authority, into his power, these are the ones who grasp and experience the fullness that he has to give. Now, television is a very intimate and yet an impersonal media. It gives us an opportunity to communicate. You and I have discovered a wonderful friendship, and yet it's only the beginning for you. Jesus Christ wants you to meet him, but also to become part of a caring fellowship of people where you live or where you work. One of the most exciting things that I see happening in the church and in society today is that Christians are gathering together to read the scriptures, share their needs, and pray for each other. And so, whoever you are, wherever you are, the Lord wants to lead you to one other person first, and then another, until gathered around you is a caring cluster of loving, concerned, praying friends. If you feel all alone in a nursing home, pray that the Lord will give you one other person there, and then he'll add others until finally there's a fellowship, a little church in miniature right there with you. I talked to a man the other day. He said that when he moved into a nursing home, it broke his heart. He felt so alone. And I said, pray for one. And then the Lord gave him another man, and they began to meet in each other's rooms once a week. They opened the scriptures. They simply read a passage and said, Lord, what does this mean to me? And if I believed it, what would I do? Then they shared their needs and concerns, and then they prayed for each other. And after they began to feel comfortable with each other, they prayed for a third and a fourth. And now there's a cluster of 12 people meeting together in that nursing home. Isn't that wonderful? I think of a great group that meets in Washington, D.C. It's made up of generals and leaders and some of the closest advisors to the president. They get together once a week. They read the scriptures, and they care about each other. And then they think through the implication of those scriptures for their life, and they seek then to live that out in the decisions and responsibilities that they have. Great things are happening to those men and through them in the government because they're not trying to find Christ alone, but together in the fellowship. I know of a group of businessmen who run a company who meet together in the paneled conference room of their company, and they talk together with each other about the meaning of Christ's will for their life and their company. They pray their prayers, and then they support each other. I know of couples who meet together in their neighborhood, of young people in their colleges, high school young people who get together early before the classes begin, and they support each other. Now, the reason for this is the second thing that Jesus promised, that wherever two or more gather together and agree, it shall be done by the Father. Now, the word for agree in Greek is also the same root for the word symphony. It means to symphonize, to bring together under the leadership of a conductor. And so when we come with our needs and concerns and share them with each other in a fellowship, then those needs are refined and they are clarified, and then together we can ask the Lord for His will and His plan and His purpose. And it is the Father's good pleasure to answer the prayers that people pray together. But more than that, move on now to the first of these three. Jesus said, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. That means that you and I have a responsibility for each other. Whatever we bind, that is, whatever we leave untouched in each other, when we fail to encourage each other or help each other to realize those things in our personalities or our character that need to be changed, we leave people as they are, and that's terrible neglect. But we're called to be with people, caring for them, loving them, encouraging them, affirming them, so that the Lord can show them the things that need to be changed. And then in the fellowship, they have the courage to change. We are like Lazarus when he came out of the tomb. He still was bound up in the grave clothes. And Jesus said to the people around Lazarus, to the fellowship, unbind him and let him go. Unwind the grave clothes off of that man. Well, that's what he calls us to do in little clusters, little fellowships, where we gather together and listen to each other, care for each other, and sustain each other, and then unwrap the never-to-be-repeated wonder, the miracle of each person. My appeal to you is that there's only one antidote to loneliness, and that is intimacy with the Lord and with each other. And that can only happen as we open ourselves to be guided to one other person, and then a third and a fourth, until we have a small little church in miniature meeting together for the purpose of realizing the presence and the power of the Lord. Blessed be the tie that binds our hearts in Christian love. The Lord wants to bind our hearts into oneness. So if you're lonely, if you feel that you are facing the lonely battle of problems you think that no one else knows about, not so. The Lord wants to give you a gift. For He is as lonely for you as you are for Him. And it's His purpose to open you up so that He can introduce you to someone else who needs you as much as you need them. Ask the Lord for that person. Surrender your openness to Him, and He will lead you out of the lonely battle of loneliness into a relationship with another person and then a group, and you won't be lonely anymore.